have said for years that we have a spiritual problem. But what if the deeper issue is not simply that something is wrong? What if the deeper issue is that we have forgotten what it means to become whole? Welcome to We Have a Spiritual Problem, a podcast where we confront the deeper questions beneath our personal struggles and collective crises. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong. I am not a theologian or a philosopher, or at least in training. I am a PhD exercise physiologist with an interest in the intersection of the physical and the spiritual. In this episode, we mark a transition. This podcast is becoming centered, becoming whole in a chaotic world. Today, we explore why the shift matters, what it means, and what human flourishing actually requires if we are going to move from diagnosing our spiritual problems to cultivating spiritual formation. Over the course of this podcast, we've been willing to say something that many have been hesitant to admit. We have a spiritual problem. Not merely political, not merely psychological, not merely economic, spiritual. We have talked about disordered loves. We've talked about misplaced ultimate concerns. We've talked about technological distraction, ideological extremism, emotional fragility, and the loss of transcendence. And that diagnosis still stands. But here's what's becoming increasingly clear to me. If all we ever do is name the problem, we risk becoming diagnosticians of despair. Diagnosis is necessary, but it's not sufficient. At some point, the question must shift from what is wrong with us to what would it take for us to flourish? That is why this podcast is becoming centered, becoming whole in a chaotic world. The old title did something important. It disrupted complacency. It named a reality many sensed but could not articulate. But it was fundamentally reactive. It began with a problem. This new season begins with a vision. Not naive optimism, not therapeutic sentimentality, but formation. The shift from spiritual problem to spiritual formation, from fragmentation to integration, from cultural critique to personal and communal orientation. Because the deeper issue is not simply we are broken. The deeper issue is that we are fragmented. We live in what can only be described as a chaotic world. Information overload, moral confusion, institutional distrust, relational isolation. Our attention is divided. Our bodies are neglected or idolized. Our intellects are inflamed but not formed. Our emotions are indulged but not disciplined. Our social lives are connected digitally but thin in substance. Fragmentation is the defining pathology of our age, and fragmentation is not merely cultural. It is personal. We are spiritually one thing on Sunday, professionally another thing on Monday. Online, someone else entirely. We do not lack stimulation. We lack integration. This is where the SPIES model becomes more than a framework. Spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, social. We have often treated these as categories to manage, but they are dimensions of a single life. Human flourishing requires integration across all five. Spiritual without physical grounding becomes abstraction. Physical without spiritual orientation becomes vanity. Intellectual without emotional maturity becomes arrogance. Emotional without intellectual clarity becomes instability. Social without spiritual anchoring becomes conformity. To become well-centered is to align these dimensions toward a coherent telos, an ultimate aim. This is where the vision of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin becomes instructive. Teilhard, as we have spoken many times on this podcast, spoke of the omega point, a final convergence toward which all creation moves. Not chaos, but culmination. Not disintegration, but fulfillment. Now, whether one fully embraces his theology or not, the intuition is powerful. Human life is not meant to scatter endlessly. It is meant to converge. To become centered is to orient one's life toward that convergence. To ask, What am I becoming? What is forming me? Toward what am I oriented? So here's the new guiding question of this podcast. What does human flourishing actually require? Not comfort, not popularity, not perpetual productivity. Flourishing requires alignment. Alignment between behavior and belief, between body and soul, between private conviction and public life. As an exercise physiologist, I understand adaptation. The body adapts to the stresses put on it. If you stress it wisely, it grows stronger. If you stress it chaotically, it breaks down. The same is true spiritually. Formation requires intentional stress, disciplines, practices, habits, ordered toward growth. Without intentional formation, we drift into deformation. Why centered? The word centered does not imply passivity. It implies orientation. A wheel is strongest when its hub is stable. A life is strongest when its center holds. To be centered is not to withdraw from the chaotic world. It is to stand within it without being consumed by it. It is to cultivate interior order amid exterior disorder. This is not escapism. It is reliance. So, what will change? We will still engage theology. We will still wrestle with culture. We will still confront spiritual confusion. But we will increasingly ask, what practices cultivate wholeness? What disciplines integrate SPIES dimensions? What habits move us toward convergence rather than fragmentation? Spiritual practices, physical training, intellectual rigor, emotional maturity, social depth. Not optimization for its own sake, integration for the sake of flourishing. Let me be clear, we are not abandoning the insight that we have a spiritual problem. We are building on it. We have a spiritual problem named the disintegration. Centered is about the integration. The first was diagnostic. This is formative. So here's the invitation. Do not simply listen, orient. Ask yourself, where am I fragmented? Which SPIES dimension is neglected? What is at the center of my life right now? Is it worthy of that place? Because something is always forming you. The question is whether that formation is intentional. If this chaotic world is defined by noise, then becoming centered requires silence. If it is defined by distraction, becoming centered requires discipline. If it's defined by fragmentation, becoming centered requires integration. The aim is not perfection. It is convergence toward truth, toward goodness, toward what is ultimate. And so this is the beginning of a new chapter. From we have a spiritual problem to centered, becoming whole in a chaotic world. The diagnosis was necessary. Now the formation begins. The question is no longer of what is wrong with us. The question is now, what does human flourishing actually require? And are we willing to be formed by the answer? Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe, share, and join the work of becoming whole in a chaotic world. Until next time, be good to yourself, be good to others.